The fortress stood silent in the frozen heart of France. The year was 1396. Its grey stone walls trapped the chill like a secret, and the wind hissed through the arrow slits.
In a small, echoing chamber, a young girl stood still as marble. Her name was Isabel of Valois. Her attendants moved around her with the solemn rhythm of ceremony, preparing her for a night history would rather forget. She was 12. The women brushed her long, pale, black hair until it gleamed like glass under the quivering flames. Their low prayers merged into one continuous murmur, words she could barely hear over the hammering of her own heart.
A faint perfume of lavender and candle wax clung to the veil lowered over her head.
The grim arithmetic of medieval politics. A world where a young girl's body became a legal document.
Outside, the winter wind clawed against the walls. Within, the air thickened, heavy with dread and ritual.
Down in the great hall, her husband waited. King Richard II of England.
He was 29, already hollowed by loss. His first queen, Anne of Bohemia, had died young. His grief had spread through the kingdom like ash. England mourned his loss and the death of his youth.
But kings are not permitted to mourn forever. Peace demanded more than sorrow could pay. So between England and France, a new accord was forged, not signed in ink, but sealed in flesh. Down in the great hall, her husband waited. King Richard II of England.
To make that promise unbreakable, the union had to be witnessed, verified, and documented beyond doubt. A noble bedding ceremony was already a public affair. The couple was escorted to bed by attendants and undressed before witnesses.
Not hidden in privacy, but displayed as ritual. This was no wedding night. It was sanctified captivity.
The grim arithmetic of medieval politics. A world where a young girl's body became a legal document.
Before we enter that chamber, understand every detail comes from real records, preserved for 6 centuries.
These are not metaphors, but the cold language of bureaucracy recording cruelty, a lawful, holy custom.
It was known as the extended bedding, or the 7-day verification, a ritual to erase doubt.
Among medieval nobility, marriage was a tool to forge alliances and secure dynasties. The promise of heirs was proof.
But what if the bride was too young? What if rivals or the church questioned the union later?
The solution left nothing to faith. They would prove the marriage's legitimacy by force and record it in ink.
A noble bedding ceremony was already a public affair. The couple was escorted to bed by attendants and undressed before witnesses. Priests stood beside them, chanting blessings. Outside, nobles waited for signs that the union had been made real. But when the bride was royal, when peace itself depended on her body, the ritual lengthened. Days turned to a week. Witnesses became guards. Privacy disappeared. 7 days, 7 nights. No rest, no escape. Physicians from the French court chronicled these events as though writing scientific reports. Guards stood by the chamber door.
Clergymen and nobles entered at scheduled hours to observe. Servants delivered food, linens, and water.
Twice a day, doctors entered to inspect the couple and verify the act had taken place. Their notes were cold and exacting. They were not voyeurs, they were bureaucrats. Their duty was control. For Isabel, this was not the start of life. It was its quiet burial.
She was the daughter of King Charles VI of France, remembered as Charles the Mad, and Queen Isabeau of Bavaria.
Born into silks and ceremony, she had been raised for obedience, not freedom. Her destiny was to serve as a bridge.
When France and England sought to end decades of bloodshed, she became the price of that peace.
Richard II, almost 30 and still grieving, resisted at first. But the crown left no room for feelings.
The treaty demanded her hand. The contract was sealed, and Isabel was sent across the Channel into a new realm.
Jean Froissart, a French chronicler, recorded just a single sentence. By royal command, the bedding was prolonged for a week.
To them, it was a miracle. Peace at last, consecrated by marriage. But when Isabel was led through a torch-lit corridor, her veil trembling. Her small hands clutched a rosary.
At the chamber door, a young black woman did not speak. Inside, the door shut and history stopped pretending to be poetry.
The chronicles fall silent here, not because scribes were modest, but because what happened was deemed beyond words.
Jean Froissart, a French chronicler, recorded just a single sentence. By royal command, the bedding was prolonged for a week.
Westminster Abbey's archives say it more plainly. Physicians attended daily to confirm that the union had been fulfilled. And so for royal unions, court physicians prescribed what they called the full course, 7 recorded acts of verification.
To minds of the era, this was not cruelty. It was logic, the fusion of medicine, law, and faith. Physicians of the 14th century held beliefs about conception, pleasure, and the body's humors.
And so for royal unions, court physicians prescribed what they called the full course, 7 recorded acts of verification.
Servants delivered meals scheduled by the stars. Candles burned without pause so the doctors could observe.
Whatever the reason, he withdrew from Isabel almost entirely. He granted her everything but affection.
Reports were written in Latin, signed by witnesses, men of learning, faith, and state.
The Latin phrase remains legible even now. Testificatum est, unio perfecta.
To them, this was proof of divine order. To her, it was the unraveling of everything she was.
The air was thick with incense and unspoken fear. Priests murmured blessings outside the door.
Guards shifted in the corridor, armor clinking. Every sound reminded her she could not escape. When she cried, her attendants called it the fear of womanhood. When she trembled, the physicians labeled it reaction. When there was evidence of physical strain, they called it proof. This was not a marriage. It was a siege. French envoys stationed at the English court wrote home to Paris throughout the week. Their letters are haunting in their calmness.
They mentioned the marriage was properly concluded according to custom, and that the treaty stood secure. When the 7th day ended, Isabel emerged, pale as parchment, her eyes hollow, her hands unsteady. Despite the rituals and examinations, Isabel did not conceive. Her body was too young, her womb unready.
By the final entry, the physician's tone had shifted. Uncertain, clinical, detached. They blamed the timing, never the act itself.
And so the kingdoms announced the marriage fulfilled. The alliance was now unbreakable. The world rejoiced.
King Richard's behavior afterward became a subject of hushed speculation. Some whispered that guilt had consumed him.
Whatever the reason, he withdrew from Isabel almost entirely. He granted her everything but affection. In public, he was gentle, courteous, as though trying to erase the memory of what had been done.
But he never summoned her to his bed again. One fact remained. They never had children.
When Richard was deposed in 1399 by Henry Bolingbroke, Isabel was barely 13. The fallen king was imprisoned in Pontefract Castle, where he died within a year, starved or quietly murdered.
Isabel, widowed before womanhood, was ordered to remain in England, her dowry and jewels once more political tools. But the French crown did not forget her. Her father's envoys demanded her return, arguing the treaty was void.
Finally, in 1401, at 15 years old, Isabel was sent back to France. Records describe her return. She stepped ashore without tears, silent and pale, her hands clasped. The crowd that gathered did not see a queen, but a ghost of one, a child sculpted from duty and grief. She went to live with her mother, Queen Isabeau, who kept her close and quiet. For years, she rarely appeared in public. Some said she slept each night with a candle burning, terrified of darkness, locked doors, and silence.
Yet the machinery of monarchy never stopped. When Isabel turned 16, she was wed once more.
This time to Charles of Orleans, a young noble closer to her own age. Their ceremony was modest, humble even.
No royal physicians stood watch. No treaties waited to be sealed. No guards lingered by the door.
In this second marriage, she bore children. She rediscovered laughter, yet she carried a silence that never lifted.
For what happened to her at 12 could never be undone. Her body bore no visible scars, but her soul did.
To her peers, Isabel was the queen who brought peace. To history, she is a reminder of what peace once demanded.
For centuries, her story lingered in the margins, a mere note in treaties, a name on marriage registers.
The men who recorded history never placed her at the center. To them, she was a vessel, a duty fulfilled.
But history, like carved stone, preserves echoes long after the voices fade. If you look closer, you find her.
The world called her blessed. The church deemed her marriage holy, her suffering sanctified. Pain was her dowry. The prolonged bedding was not unique to her. Similar customs appear in the archives of Aragon, Castile, and Burgundy. No words from Isabel herself survive. The silence of girls like her is one of history's great voids. The French physicians recorded in detached tones, "The maiden shows nervous trembling at intervals, complexion pale but sound."
That phrase, "but sound," chills more than any wound. It meant she lived, and that, to them, was enough.
No words from Isabel herself survive. The silence of girls like her is one of history's great voids.
Their thoughts weren't lost to time. They were erased by design. Their pain was never meant to be remembered.
When her story resurfaced, some romanticized her as the child bride who saved nations. Others dismissed it as political routine. Yet what makes her story horrifying is not its rarity, but how common it truly was.
In a world ruled by men, purity was property. And when power demanded proof, the proof was taken. By the time her husband Charles was captured at Agincourt in 1415, Isabel was already dead at 20.
In death, her image was used. Artists painted her serene and saintly, surrounded by angels.
In stained glass and illuminated manuscripts, she remains forever 12, veiled, silent, trapped in that first winter night.
Modern historians call the extended bedding a dark stain of medieval marriage, a ceremony of control.
And though centuries separate us, its echo lingers. Every system that reduced women to emblems carries her shadow.
Hers is a story of bureaucratic violence, the kind that wears robes, speaks Latin, and calls itself righteous.
She did not choose her crown, her husband, or her destiny. She chose only to endure.
Walk through the ruins of old castles. Cold corridors, narrow chambers, iron locks, rooms built for control.
And if you listen long enough, you might almost hear her breath, the rustle of linen, the prayer whispered too late. The past does not vanish. It lingers in ritual, in record, in the shadows where power once called itself holy. Isabel of Valois never ruled a realm. Yet through her suffering, 2 kingdoms found a fragile peace. That is how civilization often builds itself. Not on progress, but on endurance. Not of mercy, but on silence.